Okay, good morning. We're going to be in primarily in the book of Genesis today. I warned you last week that today we're going to cover a lot of ground. And so, did you get a good night's sleep last night? Okay, some did and some didn't. Okay, honesty. All right, I also told you to drink a couple cups of coffee. This is number 3 for me. Okay, so here's why I say that. We're going to cover a lot of ground. I'm going to try to summarize 10 chapters in Genesis, study one chapter, okay? It goes all the way from Adam and Eve to the Tower of Babel. Today, what we're going to try to do is establish a really big picture theme that you're going to see throughout the entire Bible. Today we're going to do the Old Testament. Next week we're going to do the New Testament. If you're visiting with us today, sorry. It's normally a little easier than what it's going to be today, okay? Come back some other time. I'll read a Max Lucado book and have some tea and make it nice and simple. But today, it's going to be a lot. So, I'm going to pray for us and we're going to jump into this. Jesus, all of this here is for us. And just like we want to sometimes take one verse and dissect it, other times we want to look at the big picture, the big trajectory of your word. So help us today to catch that. Keep us attentive. Keep us from distraction. I pray that in the name of Jesus. Amen. How many of you know what the word atheism means? Anyone? Just give me a quick definition of atheism. Don't believe in God, right? Actually, specifically doesn't believe in any God at all. Not just specifically like doesn't believe in Jesus or doesn't believe in the Christian God, but doesn't believe in any God at all. If you follow atheism to its kind of logical conclusion, not only is it they don't believe in God, but they don't believe in anything spiritual. No angels, no demons. You don't have a spirit. You're just molecules made of carbon. Your emotions are nothing but chemicals. Your reality is just a conscious clump of cells trying to process external stimuli, and when you die, you turn into worm food, and life is beautiful, right? Inspiring stuff. Okay, that's probably most atheists would say you're being too mean, but that is generally the logical conclusion of it. So, there's only a few places in the Bible, just a few, that really address atheism. The Bible doesn't spend a lot of time trying to convince people that the spiritual world is real. The Bible assumes that you already believe that, for the most part. The Old Testament and the New Testament are not trying to so much convince you that there is a God. They're trying to convince you that there's only one. Because not atheism, but polytheism was the culture of both the Old and the New Testament. Polytheism is almost the opposite of atheism. It's the belief in many gods. We might call that, or we will use a term today called religious pluralism. For instance, the United States is a religiously pluralistic nation because there's lots of religions. There's more than one religion. You might go to the grocery store and run into a Muslim. You might go to work and run into a Jewish person. You might find a Buddhist person. I mean, in America, it's religiously pluralistic, lots of different religions, lots of different beliefs. You can make up your own if you want. You can mix them together if you want. That's religious pluralism. So the Bible only spends a little bit of time on atheism. It spends a lot more time on polytheism. Does that make sense? I'll give you an example, just very simple. In the Old Testament, think of Egypt. You guys heard of Egypt? Watch The Prince of Egypt? Something like that. You know, there's a Pharaoh, right? Moses and the Israelites are enslaved in Egypt, right? In the New Testament, it's not Egypt, it's Greece and Rome, the Greco-Roman world. Both Egypt and Rome had a collection of many gods called a pantheon. If you can throw that slide up for me. That contrasts, this is just a sampling of 4 Egyptian gods and 4 Greco-Roman gods, 4 Greek gods. The Egyptians had a god named Hapi, who is the god of the Nile River. They had a god named Heket, which was the goddess of birth, and had the head of a frog. Ra was the sun god. You might have even heard Ra is one of the more well-known gods of Egypt. And also the Pharaoh was believed to be part human, part god. And the Pharaoh would have children, and the Pharaoh's son would become the next god, and then that son would have another son, and that's how the Pharaoh's throne was passed down. Now, what's interesting about this, again, this is just a sampling from Egypt. If you look at the 10 plagues of Egypt, it's the God of the Hebrews, Yahweh is his name. It's Yahweh basically in a fight with all these gods. Oh, you have a god of the Nile? Let me just turn that into blood. So that embarrasses Hapi, the god of the Nile. Oh, you have a god whose head is a frog? Let me just have a bunch of frogs come out of the river and live in your house and die and create a stink to show you that your frog god is less powerful than Yahweh, the God of Moses and the God of the Hebrews. You see how this is a battle. This is a conflict. They have a Ra, the sun god. So what does Yahweh do? I'll just make it dark. I'm going to block out the sun except for the neighborhood of Goshen where my people live. That's Yahweh saying, I'm in charge of the sun, not Ra. And then finally Pharaoh. Pharaoh believed he was God, and he believed his son would be the next God. So in the most severe act of judgment, what does Yahweh do? He kills Pharaoh's son. This is a battle. This is a power encounter. This is a conflict of the one God Yahweh saying, I am the powerful one, not your group of gods. Also, all these Egyptian gods had limitations. If you're the god of the Nile, then you're not the god of the land. You're not the god of the sky. You're not the god of the sun. You have limitations. Yahweh is saying, I have no limitations. The Greeks have a similar situation. They got Zeus, the king of the gods, or the god of the sky. Poseidon is the god of the sea. Demeter is the goddess of the harvest, nature, fertility. Apollo is the god of the sun. Interesting that both the Egyptians and the Greeks had a god of the sun, and they were different, so they're obviously in conflict with one another, right? So if you take the Egyptian gods, you take the Greek gods, then you have the Hebrew or Christian, Jewish or Christian perspective, which is there's just one God who's in charge of all of it. If you can give me that slide, the Hebrew Christian God. Yahweh is the God of all creation, the land, the sky, and the sea. Yahweh is the God that created the sun. That same Yahweh gives us children, and that same Yahweh maintains the nature and the seasons and the harvest. So this is what makes the Jewish people and the Christians of the Bible different from their people, is that they only believed in one God who did it all. Does that make sense? Not 100 gods that took care of a couple chores, but one God that did all. Interestingly, the early Christians were misunderstood as atheists because when they went to the temple of Zeus, they wouldn't worship Zeus. And how come you're not worshiping Zeus? I don't believe in Zeus. Then they go to the altar of Poseidon and they wouldn't worship Poseidon. How come you don't worship Poseidon? I don't believe in Poseidon. You do that enough times, people start to think, you don't believe in any gods. But the Christians were like, well, I just believe in one God named Jesus. Well, to Greek people who believe in hundreds of gods, like one is almost none. Like you're almost an atheist. And that's what they really thought about the church, is that they were almost like borderline atheists because they only believed in one. Isn't that ironic? That only believing in one God makes you almost an atheist to a polytheistic person. So, you guys know this, the Bible starts with Adam and Eve, common ancestry, one place, one family, one language. How did we get from that to all these people in all these places, speaking all these languages, worshiping all these gods? If there's one God, why are there so many religions? If there's one God, why are there so many people that have so many different ideas about God? That is one of the questions that Genesis 1 through 11 is answering for us, and we're going to do that today, and we're going to do all 11 chapters. So put your reading glasses on. Just kidding. We're only going to read 9 verses. I want to summarize Genesis 1 through 10. So you can settle in for a story. If you have your coffee, take a sip. Okay. That was me trembling. You're supposed to laugh at that. Really quickly, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy are called the, anyone know? Old Testament, but specifically the Pentateuch. Yes, Pentateuch. It is the law. The law is in there. Those 5 books, the New Testament attributes those to Moses. You know, they call that the books of Moses, the writing of Moses. So whether Moses wrote it down himself, or whether Moses compiled a bunch of other writings, or whether Moses had someone else write it and he signed off on it, we don't know exactly how it happened, but just know that Jesus and Paul called these books the writings of Moses. Okay, so we're looking at Moses as the source for everything we're looking at today. Moses is not writing these things until he's probably sitting in a desert, having just gotten out of Egypt. So their God just beat a bunch of gods, but they're also about to go into the promised land, and that promised land has people in it with their gods, the Canaanites with their gods. He's surrounded by other people groups on every side with different gods. How did we get here? So he goes back and he writes Genesis. You guys know the story? Genesis chapter 1. This is leading up to the Tower of Babel. Genesis chapter 1, out of this murky, watery, chaotic mess, God creates order. He separates the water from the land. He separates darkness from light. He separates the earth from the sky. It's all really just creating distinctions. Just so you know, order requires distinctions. Chaos blurs everything. So he's creating order. He's creating distinctions. He actually then gives things names. That's him creating distinction. It's him getting specific. Well, you know the story. He creates the earth, the animals, the plants, and eventually human beings, Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve are not alone in the garden. They experience God, but there's also this other spiritual being in the garden. Who is that? Yeah, Satan or the devil. He takes the form of a serpent, a snake type figure. And even though the garden is paradise, even though there's no sin in Adam and Eve's bones, they're deceived by this spiritual being. They rebel against God, and the punishment or judgment for that, in part, is that they are exiled or kicked out of the garden. Okay, there's more to it. There's pain during childbirth and working and sweating while you work to get food from the earth, but they're kicked out of the garden. So it starts this way. Here's a pattern that you're going to see develop. New world, rebellion, judgment. Genesis 1, Eden, new world, they rebel against God. The judgment or punishment is you're kicked out. So they're kicked out of Eden, and they find themselves now in a new world. They start to have kids. They have these 2 boys, Cain and Abel. At this point, sin is multiplying on the earth. Cain kills Abel, the first murder in the Bible. Cain and Abel both make offerings to Yahweh. They don't actually know his name is Yahweh at this point, but they make an offering to God. Abel's offering is more pleasing to God, and rather than Cain upping his game spiritually, he just kills his brother. That's another religious thing, is religious people would rather kill people that love God than live up to the high expectations and standards. The Pharisees did that to Jesus. The Israelites did that to their own prophets. We've done it to people. Rather than rise to their standard, kill them and eliminate the standard is the fallen state. So Cain kills Abel. That's the first murder. Later in Genesis 4, we find a man named Lamech who evidently has also murdered a couple people, and he's kind of proud of it. He's got bodies, a couple teardrop tattoos. Lamech has killed some people. He's bragging about it. And Lamech is the first person in the Bible to have multiple wives. So he's treating women like property. He's acquiring for himself multiple women. He's just not a good dude. And then to get even weirder, not only do you have the first murder, not only do you have the first polygamist, weird. In Genesis chapter 6, this is the sin that's just multiplying on the earth. In Genesis chapter 6, it says, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive. The sons of God it's a euphemism for angels, okay? Angels saw that human women were attractive. It says that they took the women as their wives and made babies with them. Isn't that a little like, that's probably stretching your imagination a little bit, right? It's in there. God calls that wicked. God calls that evil. So it's like murder, polygamy, angel lady babies, which creates a whole group of people called the Nephilim. God's like, enough. Okay, here we go again. New world, rebellion, judgment. How does God judge this? The flood. He decides he's going to flood the whole earth and start over. He picks one person, Noah. Noah has a wife. Noah has 3 sons. His 3 sons each have a wife. That's 8 people. Those 8 people go onto the ark. You know the story. Floods the earth. Noah gets off the boat. New world, right? Noah's not off the boat very long before he's drunk in his tent. His kids walk in and see it. Here we go again with this cycle of sin. You might have wondered, how did you get from Noah's family of 8 to we have 8 billion people on earth now? Genesis chapter 10, we're not going to read it, but Genesis chapter 10 tells the story of how Noah's sons repopulate the earth, okay? It's got Shem. Well, he had a son named Shem. Shem had some kids, and they had some kids. He's got another son named Ham. Ironic. Ham has some kids, and then he's got a son named Japheth, and he has some kids. And you end up at the end of chapter 10 with 70 families, or we would say 70 nations. So the earth is starting to be repopulated, but they're all still clustered together. There's a king. One of these 70 families is led by a man named Nimrod. You guys ever heard of Nimrod? You ever been called a Nimrod? That's not a compliment. Nimrod's name means rebel. In fact, it's likely that Nimrod was a descendant of one of these half angel, half women people, which is a whole how did that happen with the flood? Breaking things off. There must be some sort of spiritual situation going on here. Nimrod is this great king. Nimrod decides, I want to build a tower that reaches heaven. Nimrod was the king of Babel. Nimrod means rebel. Babel means confusion. Actually, exactly what you would think it means, right? When your kids babble, it's confusing. Babel means confusing. So that gets us to Genesis chapter 11. So again, let me just review this pattern. New world, rebellion, judgment. Eden is a new world. They rebel. Their judgment is they're kicked out of Eden. They enter into a new world. Now they're not in paradise. They rebel with murder, polygamy, and Nephilim. So God judges that with a flood. That's judgment. They get off the boat, new world. Now they're going to build this tower and try to reach the heavens. That's rebellion. Let's see where the judgment comes in. We're anticipating there's going to be judgment here. Okay. Let's read Genesis chapter 11, verses 1 through 9. Are we all caught up? We got the context. We know where we are here? Okay. Genesis 11, 1 through 9 says this. Now the whole earth had one language in the same words. And as people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to one another, come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. Then they said, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top to the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth. Let me just stop right here. This is what they're saying. We're going to build this tower so we can reach heaven, So not God coming down to us, but us going up to God, self-will. We're going to make a name for ourselves. Okay, we got this selfish ambition. We want to be known, right? And then it also says in verse 4, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth. They don't want to spread out. They want to be in one place. They do not want to spread out, which is a form of rebellion because God said, multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it. And they're like, no. We want to just all stay together. So they're rebelling against God's command to Adam and Eve. Well, picking up in verse 5, the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of man had built. And the Lord said, behold, they are one people, and they have all one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do. And nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and there confuse their language, so that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord dispersed them from there over the face of all the earth. They left off building the city. Therefore its name was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord dispersed them over all the face of the earth. A couple things here that you're going to want to note. Number one, they don't even finish building the city. The city is called what? Babel. Eventually Babel becomes known as Babylon, which you guys know is a bad place in the Bible. Okay? So this is the beginning of Babylon, which through the Old and New Testaments is bad news. So even in the book of Revelation where it says God's going to destroy Babylon, that's going back to Genesis 11. Okay, this is one of those stories that pins the whole Bible together. You might have noticed that God said in verse 7, come, let us go down and confuse their language. God is speaking to someone else. So who is he speaking to? Well, I read from Psalm 89 at the beginning of the service today. You guys know that God is not alone in heaven. You guys know that there are other spiritual beings in the spiritual world. And God is saying, we're going to go down and cause confusion. Does that make sense? You understand what's happening? Here's where this is going to start to get interesting, and you might see why this is relevant to us. These spiritual beings, led by God, led by Yahweh, go down. They create so much confusion that now the people spread out. And there's nothing in the passage or elsewhere in the Bible that says the spirits came back up. It really seems like that when the people scattered, the spirits scattered with them. That as the families of the earth, these 70 families, as they spread out, these confusing spirits went with them. Okay? There's nothing to indicate in the Bible that they returned back. Only Yahweh returns to his throne. We see Yahweh on the throne elsewhere in the Bible. We don't see these spirits. So they go down, they create confusion, and it really seems like they stay on the earth and continue to create confusion and continue to create division. Does that make sense? You might disagree with me, but can you at least see my logic, how I got there? Okay, so these spiritual beings. This Genesis 11 is Moses basically reporting the news. He's just telling you what happened. In Deuteronomy 32, Moses offers some commentary. Okay, so he's reporting the news in Genesis 11, and Deuteronomy 32 is like, let me tell you what was happening behind the scenes. Before we read Deuteronomy 32, I want to read a quote from a scholar named Michael Heiser. If you've ever used like a Faith Life study Bible or any Faith Life curriculum, Michael Heiser's like one of the head guys there. So this is from the book The Unseen Realm, page 113. Michael Heiser says this: Deuteronomy 32, verses 8 and 9, describes how Yahweh's dispersal or scattering of the nations at Babel resulted in his disinheriting those nations as his people. Yahweh, in effect, decided that the people of the world's nations were no longer going to be in relationship with him. He would begin anew. He would enter into covenant relationship with a new people that did not yet exist, Israel. So let me explain what Michael Heiser is saying here. He's saying, if there's been this pattern of new beginning, rebellion, judgment. Okay, they get off the boat. That's a new beginning. They've built this tower. That's rebellion. Where's the judgment kicking in? Here's the judgment. When you spread out, spirits are going to go with you. You might even be asking, why would God do that? Why would God let confusing spirits, who we will eventually come to call demons, why would he do that? He does it as a form of judgment. This might be hard for you to wrap your head around and hard for you to accept, but listen. Since the Garden of Eden, human beings have been saying, I would rather follow some other spiritual being. They did it in Eden. Yahweh created paradise. He provided everything they needed, and they still said, I'm going to follow this snake. Right? And then he kicks them out of Eden, and you'd think they would learn their lesson, but what do? They start multiplying with angels, right? And killing human beings. And God says, well, I'm going to have to judge you for that. And now they're trying to reach the heavens. This is God's way of saying, you want to worship other spirits? Fine. Here they are. You're not happy with my leadership? Here's some new leaders. A bunch of confusing spirits. You've rejected my leadership all the way along. Here's some new leaders. The one you choose, you've chosen to follow other spirits. Now you are going to be the inheritance of these spirits. And this quote from Michael Heiser says, God decides to start anew. Here's this new world again, this fresh start, with a people that has not even come into existence yet, called Israel. So you get to chapter 12, which we won't do today, but if you just go to the next chapter, there's a man named Abraham. And God says, these other 70 families, man, I kicked them out too. I'm starting over with Abraham. And anyone who's going to be reconciled to me is going to have to go through Abraham's seed, which is, we know from the New Testament, Jesus. Right? So he's providing this opportunity. He's like, I've already disinherited these other 70 families. There's one family, hasn't even been born yet, Abraham and his family, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, leading to David and Jesus. That's the family I'm going to choose. And if you want to come to me, you're going to have to go through that family. Does that make sense? Okay. So, Genesis 11 is the Tower of Babel. The quote that I have on the screen is saying that Deuteronomy 32 tells us a little bit about what happened at Babel. So we're going to go to Deuteronomy 32. Is everyone sticking with me so far? You seeing how this is kind of like the big picture of the Bible here? Deuteronomy 32, starting in verse 7. This is Moses still. Now he's telling us what was happening behind the scenes. He says, this is in something called the Song of Moses. Interesting song, Moses. Moses says, remember the days of old. So think back. Consider the years of many generations. Ask your father, and he will show you, your elders, and they will tell you. When the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. Again, what is sons of God? Angels. That's what it was in Genesis 6. That's really what it is through the whole Old Testament. Sons of God is a category term for angels, okay? So what this is saying, Moses is telling us, at Babel, when the Most High, when Yahweh gave to the nations, the 70 families, when he gave them their inheritance, that's referring to land. When he gave them their land, he apportioned it, when he divided them, according to the number of the angels. My understanding is that those angels, that when God said, let us come down, a flood of spirits came. Based on the number of spirits that participated in that, that's how he divvied up the land of the earth. Is that, you following that? Okay, I can tell that some of you are skeptical. I anticipated that. I want to show you in an attempt to explain this and elaborate on this, I want to give you a couple quotes from a couple scholars. This next one is also from Michael Heiser. It says in Deuteronomy 32, 8 and 9, when the nations were divided at the Tower of Babel incident, the nations were placed by God under the authority of lesser Elohim or spiritual beings. The word Elohim just is a Hebrew word that just means spiritual beings. It is used of God. God is an Elohim. Is God a spiritual being? Okay, then Israel knows. God is a spiritual being. God's an Elohim. Elohim is also a word used for angels. Elohim is also a word used, crazy story, when King Saul goes and gets a witch to call dead Samuel up from the grave. The witch says, I see an Elohim. Dang, okay, this is getting weirder and weirder. Elohim is a category, it just means spiritual beings. God is an Elohim, but Elohim is not his name. He's actually the supreme Elohim. And his name is Yahweh. He's the chief. He's the only spiritual being that was never created. All the other ones were created. He's the only one that has all the power. He's the only one that has all the authority. He's the only one that can be everywhere at the same time. He's the only one that knows everything. All the other ones have limitations because he created them. So he's unique and distinct. That's why Psalm 97:9 will say there's no one like you among the Elohim. You're in your own category, God. We call that holy. Like holy, holy, holy. There's no other spiritual being like you. Okay. The next quote is from Clinton Arnold. He says, the Old Testament gives yet another insight into the unseen realm of spirits and angels by speaking of supernatural beings that are closely attached to all the nations. The idea first appears in Deuteronomy 32, 8 and 9. That's the passage we're in right now. This passage is best explained as teaching that all the nations of the earth are given over into the control of angelic powers. Next quote is from John Walton. If you've ever read anything that's like from Zondervan on the Old Testament, John Walton probably had something to do with it. John Walton says, it's possible that God divided the nations among 70 subordinate created divine beings. This reading is increasingly favored by scholars. Now, I don't want to get hung up on the number 70 because that's really not clear, but here's the main idea. When the people scattered at Babel, spirits scattered with them. And we as a race, a human race, have been under the authority of these confusing spirits since. You got that? All right. Might explain why we got to this point where there's so many people in so many places and so many languages worshiping so many gods. These spirits want to be worshiped. They're in rebellion. They're convincing humans that we should be worshiping them. Okay? Building their own religions. Are these spiritual beings real? Well, I think this passage says that in many cases, yes. I'm not saying every little god that someone invents is real, but I'm saying that whatever happened at Babel was real, and whatever spirits were scattered at Babel are real spirits. Now, how do we know that what happened at Babel was a bad thing? How do we know that the spirits that descended at Babel and created this confusion, that Moses says that the land rights of the humans were apportioned based on these angels? How do we know this is a bad thing? Well, let's just keep going in Deuteronomy 32, same chapter. Go down to verse 16. They stirred him to jealousy with strange gods. With abominations they provoked him to anger. They sacrificed to demons that were no gods, to gods they had never known, to new gods that had come recently, whom your fathers had never dreaded. So this is how Moses understands what happens after Babel. The people start to make sacrifices to these spiritual beings. And Moses is saying, those sacrifices are to demons. The Hebrew word is shadim. And they're not good gods. They're not benevolent. They're not friendly. They're actually deceitful, deceptive. And when you sacrifice to them, you're sacrificing to demons. Now, Paul says basically the same thing in 1 Corinthians when he's talking about sacrificing food to idols. He's saying this is sacrifice to demons, and we'll actually look at that next week. Now, one more quote for you before we get into why this matters, from Clinton Arnold. The same chapter that reveals the allotments of humanity to angelic guardianship speaks of Israel provoking God to jealousy by embracing foreign gods. In reality, however, they sacrificed to demons. So let me go to the original question we're trying to answer here. If we all started with one family, in one place, in one language, with one God, how did we get to so many people in so many places and so many languages with so many gods? We got there because of the Tower of Babel. We got there because when we are all still speaking one language, descending from one common ancestor, we rebelled, and as a judgment on that rebellion, God sent spirits that scattered us, and when they were scattered, the spirits went with them. And that has turned into a pagan religion here and a pagan religion there. Does that make sense? Okay. Well, I'm glad it makes sense, because now we're going to talk about why it matters. If you've ever traveled, you may have felt this. In 2007, I went to a village in northern Uganda that was currently had just completed a civil war, where the rebellious forces, the rebellious army, was sneaking into the neighborhood, the village, kidnapping children, taking them into the bush, brainwashing them to go back into their own home village and kill their families. There was a movie about this called Invisible Children. When I was there, I'd never experienced anything like that spiritual heaviness. It felt different. It just felt like heavy. Before that, I went to a portion of a town, a portion of Quito, Ecuador, where people lived in a garbage dump. I had never personally seen such poverty, and the spiritual heaviness was unlike anything I had felt up to that point. A couple years ago, I was in a country in the Middle East. Every night, we were woken up multiple times with a Muslim call to prayer. Now, I didn't understand it, and there's something just totally human about when you don't understand what's going on. That already makes you scared. But in addition to that, the heaviness of knowing that there was this call going out to call people to pray to a God that's not even true, the heaviness. A couple years ago, I was in Cuba. It was a communist country, not allowed to preach the gospel freely. Everything that I preached there, I had to do in a private, secret meeting, because there were cameras and microphones and spies and stuff. And that heaviness was something I had never experienced. In 2011, I was in a place, and I called my wife from there, and I said, "This is the darkest place I've ever been, spiritually. This is the heaviness, the darkness. This is the heaviest place I've ever been." It was State College, Pennsylvania. I want you to know this is not just something that happens in other countries. When these spirits spread out, they came here too. That was October 5th, 2011. October 15th, 2011. I told my wife, it is so heavy spiritually here. 21 days later was when that Jerry Sandusky pedophilia thing came out at Penn State. So I don't know that it's like that now, but I'm saying at that time, when this was all about to pop, you could almost feel it in the air, the heaviness. I was actually, I won't get into that. I was telling my wife about, you guys know I like history. I was telling my wife about this nation that was founded by this warrior who got his reputation by leading men into battle and winning battles, and he was so successful in battle that they decided to make him their ruler. And he was not the ruler for very long, less than a decade, but they loved him so much that when he died, they built a temple. And the temple had a domed roof. On the roof, they painted a picture of their leader, their ruler, seated on a throne, on clouds. Underneath his feet was a rainbow. Now this is something that it's described as God doing in Revelation. They put this man on a throne in the clouds, the rainbow under his feet, surrounded by angels blowing trumpets. When he died, they built this big tomb for him. They erected a huge pole. For hundreds of years after his death, they would commemorate the day of his birth every year. And like you've heard of in ancient Rome, they even would put his face on their coins. Their most important city, they named after him. Do you know what nation I'm talking about? America. When these demons spread out, they came here too. And our pagan beliefs and practices are just as bad as everyone else's. You understand what I'm saying? If you had heard that and thought it happened on some other continent, in some other country, you'd say, that's pagan. I realize I may have just lost my job. I got $100 in the bank, I'll be fine. I'm really not trying to make anyone mad or step on any toes. What I'm trying to do is say, we are not better than anyone else. I'm trying to say, if we rebel against God, we're going to get it too. And we ought to just be honest and real, because when the Tower of Babel happened, they didn't stop at the shores here. This is a worldwide phenomenon. It's harder for us to see it when it's our stuff. It's easy to see when it's other people's stuff. Okay. I'll probably be here next week. Maybe May will be here. I don't know. Okay, so if you've traveled, you may have felt this. If you care about changing culture and changing systems, you need to understand the spiritual reality of what's happening in the Bible. You can change the system over and over and over. You just got to have the same sin popping up in different ways. We got rid of slavery, but then we had Jim Crow. It just popped up in a different way. We got rid of Jim Crow, then we got mass incarceration. It just keeps popping up until you deal with the spiritual problem. So I'm all for, let's change the systems, but understand, but if you don't change the spirit that animates the system, we're not going to really get anywhere. Does that make sense? It's not going to happen during an election or a protest. Those are not bad things. They can be part of the solution, but if we aren't dealing with the spiritual issue, the fact that there are these spirits that confuse, spread out over the earth, we're not going to get anywhere. Actually, when I was in northern Uganda, part of the frustration of the church was we had Idi Amin. We thought when he died, this would be over, but the next guy picked it up. Yeah, because you can't cut the head off a demon. You have to deal with this spiritually. You have to deal with this behind the scenes. But that doesn't mean you have to neglect the up front either, right? Okay. Don't just pray about it for 5 minutes and be like, there, it's fixed. No, there's practical stuff that has to happen too, but you have to address the spirit that is animating the issue. If you want to pay attention to international conflicts, you should pay attention to the Tower of Babel story. Understand that the people and the spirits have been scattered and they've been fighting over land ever since. It's not all just political for oil or whatever other resource. This is a spiritual battle. If you want to see a city transformed, you need to understand this. I mean, if you really want to see the city that you live in, if you want to see Philly change, you need to understand what's happening spiritually. And I don't pretend to have this intricate chart of spirits or anything. I don't have that. I just know that there's a spiritual battle that needs to be confronted with spiritual weapons, which we'll get into next week. Paul said in Ephesians, we don't even wage war against flesh and blood, but in the spirit. So there is a war. If you want to share the gospel with people from other cultures that practice other religions, you're going to need to understand this. Because if you go to them and say, your God isn't real, my God is real, they might say, But I've had these religious experiences. I've seen this. I've felt that. This happened. Now, in some cases, it's a made-up God and it's not real. But in other cases, maybe it's a demon that really has some power, and there has to be some sort of power encounter, confrontation between the Spirit of God and this fallen, confusing spirit. Does that make sense? So, like, there might have to be a power encounter, a battle, like Elijah on Mount Carmel and the prophets of Baal type thing. Or, here's an example. In Acts chapter 28, the Apostle Paul he's actually in prison on a boat. The boat sinks, and he swims ashore to an island called Malta. And he's making a fire, and he picks up some twigs, and he gets bit by a snake. And the other prisoners say this: "You must have done something bad, because you were already in prison, then you got out, and even after you got out, the God of justice is going to get you." Their God of justice was named DK. It's actually in the Greek. It doesn't say justice, it says DK. DK is going to get you because even though you snuck out when this boat crashed, now you got bit by a snake, karma's going to get you. So, Paul shakes his arm, the snake falls off, 5 minutes go by, 10 minutes go by, an hour goes by, he survives, and they're like, your God, what's his name, Jesus, must be more powerful than DK. And the whole island of Malta turns to Jesus. That's a power encounter. There's no, ABCs of the gospel there. It's straight up, my God's more powerful than your God. And Paul talks about this in 1 Corinthians. He's like, yeah, Jews and Greeks love power and wisdom. So if we can show that our God is more powerful and more wise, that's going to win people over. Now, most of us aren't dealing with Jewish people and Greek people. But what you can't deny power when it's demonstrated. This is why we should not participate in unbiblical spiritual practices. This is why you don't want to go around praying to idols and participating in seances and playing with Ouija boards and these types of things, because understand that these can have a real impact on you. They can really, truly expose you to an actual spirit that you may be giving an opportunity for in your life. This is why we don't believe that all religions lead to God. Because there are some religions that exist for the purpose of leading people away from God. Because they're founded by confusing spirits. So it's not true that all paths lead to God. There's a lot of paths, most paths lead away from God. Jesus said that he was the way, the truth, and the life, right? One path. He even said it's a narrow path, right? Do you see how the whole Bible's coming together with this? Not all paths lead to God. I have heard pastors of huge churches say this: "Oh, Yahweh and Allah are the same God. There's the Christian name or the Jewish name and the Muslim name, two names for the same God." That is a total unbiblical lie. It's not two names for one God. It's two separate spiritual beings. One of them is God. One of them is the true creator of the universe. The other is not. Allah doesn't have a son. I mean, it's kind of like saying that, if you know two guys named Jim, oh yeah, that's the same guy. Like, no. One has a wife and 3 kids, one doesn't. Just because the similarities are on the surface, the differences are far more meaningful and significant. Does that make sense? I know people will say like, oh yeah, they have so much in common. Well, not really. I mean, when you get down to the nitty-gritty of it, they don't have that much in common. You're looking at these surface similarities, but ignoring all these deeper differences. Last reason why this matters. This is why we exalt Yahweh above every other spiritual being. I'll just give you an example here. And now that you understand perfectly this concept. You might read the Old Testament a little different when they go into the promised land and have to deal with all the spiritual beings there. When the kings of Israel mislead them into worshiping, other spiritual beings. Psalm 97:9, the psalmist says this, "For you, Yahweh, are most high over all the earth. You are exalted far above all gods," or all other spiritual beings. So he's saying that the God of Israel, the Hebrew God, is above all the other spiritual beings. It's not denying that they exist, it's just saying he's above them. And here's the kicker. This Yahweh that's above them all, Jesus said he was Yahweh. Jesus said, before Abraham was, I am, which is Jesus' way of saying, this Yahweh that you all like, I'm him, in a body, in the flesh. That's why they wanted to kill Jesus. The one person that could say it, they didn't let say it. And so, we'll get into this next week, but just to get you ready, Paul talks about it a little differently, but Paul talks about something called powers, principalities, rulers, and authorities. This kind of complex organization of spiritual powers that Jesus defeats at the cross. All the other spiritual beings, he defeats them. And then get to Revelation. What's the mission of God is to get a representative from every one of these people groups that's been scattered, speaking different languages, living in different places. He's like, we're bringing it back to one family through Abraham's seed, which is Jesus. We're going to undo Babel, and we're going to get all those languages and people that we scattered. Now we're going to collect them under Jesus, through Jesus. So that's the whole Bible in 45 minutes. Next week, we're going to do the New Testament side of this, which is really the same concept. It's just Paul's language, not Moses' language, but the principles really they carry over exactly the same. Okay, I realize that's a lot. I'm going to have coffee after this too. I want to pray for you. Oh, this week in your discipleship groups, some of you in your discipleship groups are going to discuss this. In your discipleship groups, you may even watch a 7-minute video from the Bible Project. If you don't watch it, I'll share that this week in our church's social media so you can just watch it yourself. It'll explain it in cartoon form for those of you that need, illustrations to help with this, all right? If the 6-minute video helps you understand it better than my 45-minute well-crafted sermon, fine. Okay, let me pray for us, and then I'll let you go. Make sure to corner May and say something nice to her.